Welcome along, my aspiring allies, and thank you for joining me on this most recent episode of the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. Today, I am joined by Radhika Dutt. Now, Radhika is an entrepreneur, speaker, and the author of the fantastic book, Radical Product Thinking. Now, we did speak about this book quite a lot in the podcast because it is jam-packed full of frameworks and toolkits that you can use not just in your business to make your business better, but also in terms of your leadership development and inclusive practices that you can bring forth when it comes to the way you think about the way you do things and the way that your business does things. Now, Radhika is an incredibly impressive person because she's also an MIT graduate. She speaks 9 languages and she's built products in so many different industries, including broadcast, media and entertainment, telecoms, advertising, government, robotics, and even wine, which she shares some examples of in our conversation today. She really has brought some frameworks out that for me personally, I will begin to implement in my own business. So this is an absolute must listen episode as far as I'm concerned. So without further ado, you know the drill. Please sit back, relax, and get comfortable in whichever way works best for you. And please give a very warm welcome to Radhika Dutt to the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. So, Radhika Dutt, thank you so much for joining me today on the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. It is a pleasure to have you along.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited after we spoke in December. I was really looking forward to this conversation.
Same, me too as well. And I've been doing a lot of thinking as well about when we did chat before, and I can't wait to start sharing with people all about your kind of your framework and your thoughts as to how you arrived where you've arrived at. But I know that the curious brain within me, and I imagine in other people as well, are going to be thinking, this person's super impressive. How on earth did she get, to where she is and kind of arrive at the point where she's drawing together all the amazing kind of concepts and thoughts that she's having? So I think what would be really cool for everyone is if you could give us a little bit of a whistle stop tour of, okay, where you are now, but how did you get there?
Okay. Let's see. So where am I now? I am a speaker. I'm an author. My first book was Radical Product Thinking, and I'm working on my second book about why goals and targets don't work and what actually works instead. And I do consulting. So that's a lot of things. But how did I get here, I guess, is the big question. So my background is that I studied electrical engineering at MIT. And, my husband always jokes that I haven't coded one honest day of my life, which isn't entirely true. I actually have. But it was never my passion, right? But the one thing that really stayed with me from my engineering days at MIT is that you don't just throw things at the wall and hope for things to work out. There's Murphy's Law, which says anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And so when you want to create change, you have to engineer that change very systematically. And all of my engineering education instilled in me this idea that you have to engineer that change very systematically. And what didn't sit right by me for so much of my career was this idea that if you just listen to Silicon Valley, it's the mindset that, oh, just throw things in the market, see what works, see what people are drawn to, and then you release those products, and then you'll just keep iterating and you'll figure it out. And time and time again, we see that this is not how it works out, right? That we don't necessarily create the change that we want to bring about. That's not necessarily change that it's good for the world just because we disrupt things. And so having seen that several times, but it's not just, because you're thinking about good in the world or not. What I saw was there are a lot of product diseases that happen, meaning good products go bad when we're not systematic about how we engineer change. And so that's what led me to radical product thinking. My realization was a lot of conventional wisdom is just plain wrong about how we do things in the corporate world, and we can unpack that in a moment. And someone had to say the emperor has no clothes, so might as well be me. So that was the first part that led me to write Radical Product Thinking. And the second part was this realization that a lot of why we are not able to do long-term thinking in the corporate world is because of goals and targets and how they drive short-term thinking. And this is one of the fundamentals that we haven't challenged since the 1940s. Goal setting has become part of corporate psyche since 1940s, and it's high time that we challenge it. So that's sort of the overview of what brought me here.
Yeah, no, amazing. Thank you so much. And there's so much in that already that I think is like, again, my brain's firing, and there's so much about you that is impressive and intriguing as well. So if I may ask as well, what was it like being an engineer at MIT? Like, what was your experience in that space, if you're happy to just share a bit about that?
It's so funny, speaking of inclusion,
Yeah.
it's um, so my brain just works very differently. If I look at, what were my favorite courses at MIT, it was studying Japanese. I
Okay.
hated I hated studying statistics. I loved semiconductor physics. I loved quantum mechanics, but didn't like the math background that I needed. So if I were to summarize it, it's that I looked at people around me and I felt like I did not fit in. I was not the traditional engineer who was excited about writing code and debugging. It was engineering change, and it was the human element of all of this. Linguistics was amazing to me. But a lot of what came easily to me, I dismissed as, well, that's just easy. It's not true that it's easy. It's
Easy for
just
you.
exactly. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, people would say, you speak 9 languages. How did you do that? That's amazing. And to me, that was like, well, it's not really amazing. I just, picked it up. Uh,
Just casually picked up 9 languages.
but that's the thing, right? Like, you judge yourself by everything that you're surrounded by, and all you see is what is hard for you and where you don't fit in. You don't fully appreciate when you're 18 what you're actually really good at. And it's taken me decades since to be able to truly embrace sort of who I am and what I bring to any project or workplace or a company.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I really like kind of what you're calling out there is that like we all have our frames of reference, don't we? And we all have our strengths and we all have our areas that maybe aren't quite as strong or easy for us. And it is about learning ourselves, isn't it? Saying and not taking for granted the fact that, oh yeah, but that's so easy for me. Whereas there are other people that will literally be looking at you in awe, kind of like, wow, how does she do all of these things that she does? And you're just like, oh, it's Saturday. I've just done that. Because that is how things work. And I often think when I talk to people about changing workplaces as well, like it's the same, isn't it? That there are things that we take for granted just because we can do them simply, or we can see the connection, or we can join the dots. It doesn't work the same way for other people. And I really like then in you have taken that from a when you were talking about engineering change, but you were talking about engineering human change. So you're taking those kind of concepts and being like, and now let's put it into a playbook so that you can really understand it. So tell us then a little bit about your decision to then, well, if anyone's gonna challenge conventional wisdom, it might as well be me. So tell us about that.
So I'll share this from the angle that I've made mistakes, right? So if I think about my first startup right out of MIT, I used a lot of conventional wisdom. So our vision in that startup, this was back in 2000, was revolutionizing wireless. And conventional wisdom tells us that your vision has to be broad, has to sound inspiring, it has to be never changing, right? And so, yeah, revolutionizing wireless was all of that. But what I've realized since is what you need is not the sort of a broad and fluffy vision. What you really need is a very detailed vision that acts like a filter for you. You have to be able to hold up things that you're going to do next. And you have to be able to look at that against your vision and say, should I or shouldn't I do this? And sometimes the answer should be, no, don't do it. Right. And when the vision is revolutionizing wireless, pretty much anything goes. But this is the kind of vision statement that you see out there.
Hmm.
It's Boeing's vision is what? To be the global enduring industrial champion in aerospace. It's like, what does that even
What
mean?
does that mean? Yeah. Yeah.
How do you measure being this industrial champion in aerospace? Is it by revenues, market share? I mean, you can do that by share buybacks, for example. You can get more revenues by throwing together a plane that uses the same old body and just sticking bigger engines on it, which is what they did, right? And none of it necessarily is good for the long term, but
Hmm.
your vision is sort of meaningless. And so what I realized is we need a radical shift in thinking in terms of a vision. So here's a radical vision statement. And I'm going to share this for a startup that I had founded in 2011 and sold in 2014. So here's how the fill in the blank statement goes, so that you don't focus on the words, but you focus on the profound questions this fill in the blanks is helping you answer. So here goes. Today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they are likely to like and learn about wines along the way, they have to find attractive looking wine labels or find wines that are on sale at their local store. This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments and it's hard to learn about wine in this way. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We are bringing about this world through a recommendations algorithm that matches wines to your personal taste and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. Now, see, unlike revolutionizing wireless, hopefully, after sharing such a vision statement, you knew exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. And that's the power of a radical vision statement. And this is what goes against all conventional wisdom. This vision statement wasn't a tagline. It's not a short, memorable slogan. Every time I share this vision, the words might change a little bit, but the words are not what are important. It's the profound concepts and the questions I'm answering about what is the problem? Why does it need to be solved? Because maybe it doesn't. And then finally, what's the end state I envision? And when I've answered all of this, then it's only then that I have earned the right to talk about my product.
I love that. So you are taking people into the whole process as to this is exactly why we exist and exactly why we make the decisions that we do. And I noticed when you were saying that they were very deliberate. So when you said it as a kind of a fill in the blanks, I can imagine at the start of each of those chunks, it was a today when and want to. Like, there were very clear indicators of these are the processes we're going to go through. And I can imagine those fill in the blank statements are outlined in your book. I hope.
They are indeed.
Excellent stuff. Because immediately I'm thinking, oh, I like this.
A lot of people who use this framework, they tell me that, they've been to offsite meetings. And when you start with a blank sheet of paper, the problem is that you leave the offsite coming out with a vision that sounds very much like what you went in with.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to, you know, sully this blank piece of paper unless you've come up with the perfect words. So it just leads you to wordsmithing, which is not a useful exercise in itself. What you need to answer is those hard questions, right? Like, for instance, when I shared this vision statement, and I made it sound easy because I said today when amateur wine drinkers, but the reality is that required a lot of discussion and thought because we could have targeted a much wider spectrum. Like, when I say amateur wine drinkers, what we meant, right, is someone who is, if you look at the wine drinking or wine knowledge spectrum from 1 to 10, where 10 is winemaker level knowledge and 1 is, I know nothing about wine, we were targeting someone who is 2 to 6. Why is that? We could have targeted someone, who was, let's say, 6 to 10. Why didn't we do that? Because someone who knows that much about wine, it turned out that they're very snobbish about wine. They feel like, well, what can you tell me with your algorithm that I don't know already? All of this required, not just knowledge, but we arrived at this having tried different things, right?
Yeah.
It required discussion within the team. Where are we going to focus? And it's funny, sometimes when I'm working with a leadership team and creating this alignment, they say to me, and I share a vision statement of other companies, they'll say, oh, but that was easy to create because, it's such a clear product. And it's really funny, it wasn't easy to create at the time. You won't believe the discussions we went through. It sounds easy after the fact, right?
Yeah. After you've put the work in to arrive somewhere that makes sense, right? Yeah. And
Exactly.
it sounds like everything you've laid out there is essentially, it's a vision statement that allows you to workshop your thinking, and go through each of those iterations and test it and retest it. Um, Whereas I think it feels to me like an anchor point that you can always come back to, like, does this still work? Does this still work? And I quite like as well when you were ending it that it then came to kind of because it's not snappy. Let's face it, is it? It's got enough information in it that it's clear, but it's not snappy. But when you were coming to the end of it, it almost felt like, actually, and then this is the piece that would, it ends with the piece that would ordinarily be considered the traditional vision, right? Except you're showing your workings prior to it. So you've still got that visionary piece in it of like, and this is the thing that we're going to do where we look into the future. But here's actually the foundation that led us there, rather than just something, like you say, fluffy that sits there that you're like, well, that's great. What does that mean?
Exactly. And your point that we have to keep looking at this vision on a regular basis to say, is this still valid? I think that is such an important point, because that, again, questions the conventional wisdom, where conventional wisdom says you write a vision statement once and it has to be valid 30 years from now. Whereas, when you look at how quickly the market is changing, customers are changing, there are black swan events that aren't all that black swan after all. The things keep changing. How can our vision stay the same? So in fact, like when you write such a vision statement, you have to be able to look back on it and at least every 6 months be able to say, is this still valid? And if it's an early stage startup, it might need to be even earlier, right? Or it might be every quarter that you look at it, because it all depends on your pace of learning. Like, how quickly are you discovering um, what is valid and what is not? And it then helps you include your team in these learnings and say, okay, here's where we were wrong. It turns out, level 6 to 10 of a wine drinker is not the right market for us to go after at all. We really should be going after these other people instead, right? Whatever that learning is, it helps you bring everyone with you on the journey.
Yeah, I love that. And it really has a lot of echoes around the parallels of conversations I have with leaders more broadly about their mindset as well, which is, when, if we've now learned something that we didn't know before, go back to your belief system, go back to your vision statement, go back to the thing that you were using as your anchor point for the quote unquote truth of the current moment. Does that still make sense? Like, sense check it. Because I think one of the things certainly that I see is people are really reluctant to change their mind, aren't they? Like, we feel like because we made a decision or we made a commitment, that we have to stay with it. And I love that you're here saying, here is absolute 100% permission. If it doesn't fit anymore, change it. Like, and you said the words yourself, some of these things don't work in reality. They don't work in real life. So make it work in real life.
Yeah, exactly. What you just said about real life, right? The best written vision statements, what happens then? You write this vision, but then I find that companies sort of file it away for posterity. That
They're
the
there with the
vision,
values that are on the board, right? They're just
yeah,
just somewhere pretty, but no one knows about them.
yeah, exactly. You won't believe how many times it happens that, I hear someone say, "Oh yeah, we do have a vision. Wait, let me look up. Where is that? What was it again? I have to remember what it was, right?" And it's like, well, that's exactly what you don't want in a vision statement. You don't want someone to memorize what you have said. You want it to be so internalized that you should be able to talk to anyone on the team and they should be telling you the vision statement in their words. And it has to sound like what you would have said yourself, right? But
Mm.
what's most important is that it's not in your words. That's when you know that it's everyone's vision, that they have internalized it.
Oh, yes, that. And that's one of those beautiful measures of like culture as well, isn't it? When everybody can take, they buy into the thing that's being done, but they're taking from it the thing that resonates with them, but they can still relay it confidently, knowing this is why I come to work, this is what I'm working towards, I know what we do, and I know my part to play in all of this, because this is what this means for me. And it might not have the same words, but it sure as heck carries the right weight.
And what you just said, that this is what this vision means for me. This is really what you want as a leader, that you want to spread your influence. You want to get people to think like you, even when you're not in that meeting, even when you're on vacation. You want people to make decisions like you would. And so this is the second piece of, how the vision actually comes into everyday life and the reality of life, right? Um, the way you want your vision to be used is not to be filed away, but to be used for decisions. And so the framework that I use for that is prioritization. And the way I talk about this, right, is as a leader, the way you intuitively prioritize is you're constantly thinking about the long term versus short term. It's this yin and yang that you're holding in your head constantly. And the more experience you have as a leader, the more this comes to you intuitively. And for your team, that might not be as obvious. So, how can you make this obvious for your team so that people can think like you and make decisions like you? And to me, the answer is this 2x2 framework, an X and Y axis, so that you can make this yin and yang very obvious and visual for your team in an X and Y axis. So your Y axis is the long term. It's the vision fit. And now you have a very clear vision so that you can look at that Y axis and say, is, this particular initiative or this feature or, the sale, let's say, is this good for our vision or not? And your Y axis is the short term. I define that as survival. Is this good for survival or not? Right? And so now there are four quadrants that emerge. Things that are good for vision and survival, those are what I call the easy decisions.
Yeah.
But if you're always just sticking to easy decisions, you're still being myopic. So sometimes you have to invest in the vision. This is where it's good for the vision, but not good for the short term survival. So examples of investing in the vision. This might be if, let's say, you're investing in training for the team. Another example might be, maybe you need to take 3 months to refactor code. A lot of DEI work, I would say that fits in investing in the
Yeah.
vision. You don't necessarily see it instantly pay off in terms of revenues, but you know that it's really important in terms of team culture, et cetera. It's investing in the vision.
Yeah. And avoiding shortcomings somewhere down the line when people have got the skills to handle things after, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And the opposite of investing in the vision is when you're doing things that are vision debt. It's good for short term survival. Maybe it brings in revenues, but it's not good for the long term. Something around vision debt, an example might be, you're taking on a custom deal because it's going to bring in revenues. It's going to help you make that Q4 number, but it just isn't good for your long term vision.
Mm.
Um, Another example might be, you might be giving a promotion to someone, but you feel like they don't particularly embody these values, but you feel like, they're the ones who brought in the most revenue or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
So that might be vision debt that you might take on. There are so many other such examples. But and the last quadrant, by the way, just to be complete, is the danger quadrant. This is both bad for vision and survival, but it's not necessarily what people are asking for. You just do danger things accidentally. You might think it's vision debt and it ends up in danger. So, I'll skip that one in terms of examples because you don't actively look for something there. It just happens as mistakes.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring up this framework is because once you have a clear vision, now everyone can start to align on decisions. That when you talk about decisions, you can start to think about, where things fall on these quadrants, right? And getting people to think about what is the right trade-off at the moment. You might be a bootstrapped company and you're going to die if you don't survive long enough, and maybe what is most important is to take on that revenue, whatever it takes, right? And maybe you have to take on vision debt, but at least acknowledging that makes people feel like you care about the vision, that you're not just doing whatever without it's not that you're losing faith in your vision, right? That's what's important.
It sounds like a conscious awareness, and actually, when you, as you were saying there, when you're talking about communications to no matter how big or small your teams are, you can actively say, this is what we're doing it, this is why we're doing it, this is how long we intend to, we intend to stay doing this for, here's how we're going to get out of this if we need to. Like, you can really put the conscious decision making process behind it, so even when people think, I'm not on board with this, they understand the decision making process. They know, they can see the workings. So it feels like everything you're outlining here is just share your workings, demonstrate how you get to where you get to, and people can buy into that.
And it's so true. And I feel like this is something about inclusion that I've learned through my career. Um, that in many companies, right, I find that consensus is often this dance that you do. And building consensus feels like an inauthentic dance sometimes, that the decision has already been made. You're just sort of going through the motions. And it doesn't buy anyone anything really, and everyone can sort of see through this dance and it feels inauthentic. You've not really created inclusion. Whereas when you take this approach, it leads to two things. One, it makes decisions less subjective. It's not my opinion versus yours, and I'm just pretending to get consensus. It might be the reality that, look, I feel like as a company, this is our only way to survive, but I'm sharing with you what my thought process was. And what we're talking about is, it's not just my opinion versus yours. Maybe it might be that you can talk to me about, well, are we in alignment on the vision? And if we are in alignment on the vision, are we in alignment on survival and what it means for us? Like, why do we need to do this? And if we're in alignment on both vision and survival, you find that it's suddenly so much easier to arrive at this decision that neither of us likes that we're taking on this vision debt. But if we're in alignment on vision and survival, we both recognize that, you know what, maybe we have to just hold our nose and do this thing, even though we don't both want to do this.
Yeah, I can understand that. And certainly if I think about some of the SMEs and the very small businesses that I work with, that sometimes they find themselves having to take on clients that ideally wouldn't fit in their arena. They might be in an industry that they wouldn't want to ideally be dealing with, or things like that. And this kind of makes it, I'm not going to say palatable, but it makes it a bearable, conscious decision to be like, well, we recognize if we don't do this, we can't service our clients that do sit in the spaces we want to be. So a little bit of that, like you said, we can all agree for now we'll do that thing, even though we know that ideally we wouldn't.
You're so right. And also, just the way you talked about it, it's almost a way of asking, what are our guardrails and at what point will we invest in the vision, right? There was one point where I was talking to a potential client and I had to make a really tough decision. Do I take on this client or not? A lot of their business practices went against my values. And so, do I do this or not? Like, the revenue potential was fantastic. Um, and the one thing that made me realize that, okay, I would take on this client after a lot of deliberation was the recognition that, yes, this was vision debt, but the way I would invest in the vision was that I would talk to them about their business practices. And what I think also needed to change, I would try to work with them on trying to make those changes. And if I felt like I'm not making any progress, that I couldn't make a real difference, then I would step away from this deal. So that's what helped me balance
Yeah,
vision debt against investing in the vision. And I did step away from it. So, yeah, those
yeah,
are
absolutely.
choices that we can. Going back to your point about values, right? Rather than values being things on the board somewhere, this helps us live our values.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can imagine as well the same is also true, that actually if we have to make a difficult decision, that we think that turning down this project is going to be a bit of a warning signal for our survival, and we still choose to do it because it's not aligned. Like there's still a consciousness behind it that actually, I mean, we know that we're straying into that territory, aren't we, where accidents can happen. But actually, if the conversation has taken place, you're almost preparing yourself for, and if something happens, what's our backup plan if we choose to say no to this because it doesn't align and it leaves us in this quadrant here? How will we cope with that?
Yeah.
Again, it enables a much more honest conversation about the reality that you're about to embark upon. I really love that. I really love that quadrant model. Thank you for sharing that.
One thing that strikes me is for our listeners, right? I feel like a lot of our listeners are the kind of people, if they're listening to this podcast, likely you're introspective, very thoughtful. And given the state of the world right now, right, there's so much that is most likely weighing on your soul. Um, there's just so much where you feel like, what do I do? What difference do I make? And how do I even make that difference, right? And I think the answer to that sometimes lies in looking at this vision versus survival. Sometimes what you realize is what is vision debt, that quadrant sometimes turns into what I describe as soul debt for you.
Yeah.
That that when you feel like you're doing something that goes against your vision, you're accumulating the soul debt. And over time, it weighs on you so much that you kind of feel burnout from that, right? And one thing I'll say is we have this perception that one day we're going to be asked to do something that goes against our morals and ethics. And we think of ourselves as ethical heroes in waiting, that we will, at that point, when we're asked to cross that line, we will bravely say no without any regard to the consequences. And the reality is, right, nobody will ever, or it's very rare that you're going to be asked to cross this line that is so blatant and obvious. What happens is it's a series of small decisions, and you never realize how far you've fallen until you sort of look at it in accumulation. And it's been weighing on your soul slightly over time. Or worse yet, right? It has changed you in ways that go against your values. I see this in a lot of my classmates from MIT who went into investment banking and trading. And those people over time have just changed so much. Like I have nothing in common with them anymore. Like their values changed after being in the financial industry and living and breathing that sort of a lifestyle, right? So, uh, my point is, by having this vision versus survival and thinking about your own vision and what it means for you in terms of survival, you learn how you can preserve your own values. What do you want to stay true to? And that is something that you sort of really have to think about for yourself on a regular basis.
Thank you so much for sharing and saying that, because I think that is, well, like you say, not only hugely important currently with, it feels like I don't think anybody's not having a challenge with something that is going on somewhere in the world, or within their organizations, or just generally within their own heads. And I think that's a really great way of framing some of this about how are we paying conscious attention to ourselves and what we're engaging with, and what really matters. And if people want to do some kind of, I like when you called it soul debt, like it's almost like a soul inventory, isn't it, of like, actually, what are the things that matter to me and where would I stack them up? and
Mm.
in the long term and in the short term, where am I honoring or not honoring these things? And it can even be simple things, kind of, as well, around like our own health, or decisions that we're making, like how are we um just bringing conscious awareness to our decision making processes. So actually this model, whilst it's a fabulous business tool, but it's also, as you have now demonstrated, a fantastic personal tool, just generally to think about our own long-term and short-term thinking for ourselves, for the, our relationships, and for our businesses too.
Oh, So much of what you said so resonated for me. And since we are talking about inclusion, there's one story that I would do want to share and feels especially appropriate for this time. Um, so, one of the stories that I talk about in the Radical Product Thinking book is the story of Claudette Colvin. And history has all but forgotten her name. She actually just passed away only just a few weeks ago. So, Claudette Colvin, for those of us who haven't heard about her, she was someone who was arrested at the age of 15 for defying bus segregation laws in Alabama and Montgomery. And this was 9 months before Rosa Parks. But yet, very few people heard of her. And I interviewed Claudette Colvin for my book. And it was just such an honor, I can't even tell you. And I asked her, she was 15 at that time when she refused to give up her seat on the bus. And I asked her, like, how did you do that? And she said, well, that just felt like a spur of the moment decision. I felt like I didn't want to give up my seat when the driver asked me to. But, what truly was investing in the vision for her was she became one of four plaintiffs in the Supreme Court case, and Gale versus Broder. And that was the Supreme Court case that ended bus segregation and was just so crucial to the whole civil rights movement. And, when I think about um, just how much that was investing in the vision, the level of pressure there was to bow out of being a plaintiff in that, her fiery testimony that led to that ruling, right? She didn't gain anything from that. In fact, she ended up having to move to New York. She never told her story to the people she worked with. She was a nurse in New York. Nobody knew her story, right? And I thought that was amazing. She didn't do it for the glory. Like she said, the reason she did it was because she wanted to live in a world where everyone could share the same American dream, and she was tired of people saying that this wasn't right but not doing anything about it. And just living in the world that we are, I think sometimes it's so important to look at what is our vision, and at times how do we invest in that vision, and what is our vision debt, right? And sometimes protests, etc., are ways of investing in that vision.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that story. What a story. And like you say, someone who at great personal cost, because no doubt she came under a lot of pressure around that time as well. If, like you say, if she became a plaintiff, to I can only imagine the harassment and pressure that would have been sent her way. And yet that one act of defiance led to a complete legislative change.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I guess not all of us feel capable of thinking that actually the small actions that we do could translate into those long-term actions, but actually that is just one example of yes, it can. The small consistencies, you never know when the thing that you do is going to be the thing that has a ripple that changes out. So how are we aligning with our vision? How are we aligning with our values and our morals, and the vision we have for the world that we would like to be living in? Like, and I guess it comes back to you were saying about some of your friends as well. Like, it works both ways, doesn't it? The small changes that occur within each and every one of us every single day, they all, if we're running in parallel, for those of you listening, I'm kind of holding my hands up, and actually there's small degrees of changes over time, you end up going in completely different directions.
Mm.
And what you're talking about is bringing consciousness to those decisions, so you don't just wake up one day thinking, "Craig, how do you have to get all the way over here?"
Yeah, so
Yeah,
true.
amazing. I want to kind of just change direction slightly if we can, because something that you said when you were talking kind of early on was around goals don't work, and how you not only unsatisfied with just challenging traditional thinking and conventional wisdom, be like, hang on, goals, they are so last season as well, we're going to do something different. So tell us what you all mean about goals don't work.
Yeah. So let's start with just why do I even say that? How did I arrive at goals don't work? This is not even altruism. Even for business success, goals and targets can backfire. So here's my earliest experience with that. I was in my 20s. I was working at a company called Avid. And Avid at the time, right, we dominated the video editing market. Every Oscar-winning movie, every movie made in Hollywood was edited using Avid video editors. And if you looked at our sales numbers, right, you would think everything was just peachy. We were doing so amazingly well, nothing could go wrong. But if you just dug into the numbers a little bit, here's what you would have found. This strategy all worked until it didn't, because our low end was getting eroded by Apple and Adobe. Our mid-tier 2 was starting to get eroded by Apple and Adobe. And the way we were making our sales targets was by moving further and further into the high end. So then you ask, wait, why did we do that? Why wouldn't we question all that's happening, look at what do we need to change, learn from, and adapt, etc., right? And here's where goals and targets backfire. When you set a target for a team, the incentive you create in the company is to show you that, ta-da, look, I've hit my targets. And so in this case, we were hitting targets. But what you needed was to not just look at this binary question of, have we hit targets? Yes, no. Who's a high performer, right? Because all of sales is about judging people based on who is a high performer, whether they're hitting targets or not. And so in all of this, there are very few people who want to come to you and give you bad news and say, you know what, things are not going well in the low end, right? At that point, you would say, well, this other person is doing really well. Like, why can't you, right? And so nobody wants to come to you as a leader and give you that bad news that there are things that are not going well. What you really want as a leader is for people to not just present to you the good numbers, you want them to look at the bad numbers and say, huh, I wonder what just happened there. Is that an opportunity? Is that a problem? You want them to look at the bad numbers. And so this is when I first just had this inkling that there's something wrong fundamentally with goals and targets. And over time, I kept seeing this again and again, but in different ways, right? And I guess most recently, what I've been seeing is OKRs, or objectives and key results. They have been evangelized by Google, by uh, John Doerr, who's a billionaire VC. You know, just everyone seems to be using OKRs. And I kept finding that it wasn't necessarily producing business success. And it was, in fact, stifling experimentation, learning, and adaptation. And so, you know, just a lot of very superficial, how do you say, rationale that I was finding was people saying, well, if you just set the right goals and targets, then you don't run into these issues. If you just set the right OKRs, things work just fine. But that's not been my finding.
Amazing. So, and I'm loving how you're breaking all of this down, because it makes so much sense when you say it. Actually, when we become so fixated on an outcome or an end result, or the end part of the destination, we're not paying enough attention to the journey. And you're talking there about actually interrogating the bad numbers and being experimental. So what is your suggestion then, if we're going to go, okay, we understand the purpose of OKRs, maybe we'd like to do something differently. So what should we be thinking about to bring about that kind of inquisitive thought process around the right kind of things we could be measuring?
Mm. Um, and the first thing I do want to say before I start talking about how we should go about it
Mm.
is, whenever I start criticizing goals and targets, people say, well, but how do you keep people accountable? How do you make sure that we see progress? Like, if you don't measure, how do I know it's going well or not? And the key thing I want to emphasize before I get into how do you do this right is, I'm not against measurement. In fact, I think measurement is really important. What I'm against is goals and targets as a way of evaluation. and evaluating progress. I feel like that's what doesn't work. We have to measure a lot, but I call it Dutt's law. Dutt's law is that metrics are only effective when they're used as tools for insight and not yardsticks for evaluation. So let's talk about what works. And I'm going to go back to this Avid example since I talked about what didn't work, right? So it doesn't mean you don't have sales targets because you're still a public company. You need sales targets to know sort of to set expectations on what are we trying to do. But I think here's the kind of puzzle that the leadership team needed to present and to dig into the bad numbers, right? So sales targets might still be, we need to make X million by the end of this year. But I wouldn't just want to look at overall numbers. I would want to understand what is happening in each part of our market segment. And so the puzzle is, I am seeing that we're really successful in the high-end deals, but we're losing out on the low end, and even our mid-tier is getting eroded. We're starting to lose some of these deals. So what is happening? And so the puzzle starts with to define the puzzle, we need 3 O's. That's how we define the puzzle. So the first O is the observation. And this observation of what is happening with a low end, mid tier, high end, right? That's the observation that I would describe. So the next is the open questions. That's the second O. So the open questions would be to really look at, so why are we losing in this low end? And if you looked at that, you would see that Apple and Adobe have very different business models. Apple's business model is, I want to sell the hardware. I'm thrilled to give away the software. If you buy the hardware, I'll give you the video editor for free. We can't possibly compete in that market or against such a business model. Look at Adobe. They want you to just buy the video editor, but the idea is to sell you the whole product suite. You know, it's very hard to compete against that too in the low end. And so in the low tier, this is what's happening. Then we look at the mid tier, what's happening there, and what do customers need? Do we have a fighting chance in the mid tier? And then lastly, what do we do in the high end? Right? And where is the market potential there? These are open questions that we truly needed to investigate and think deeply about. And then finally, the last O is the objective. What is the summary of this puzzle? So based on what the market potential is and what we could do on the low end, mid tier, and the high end, how should we respond in this changing market? So this is what we should have asked and set as a puzzle, right? So that's the first part, the puzzle setting. And that's where you create alignment in terms of what is the problem I'm setting. And then comes the puzzle solving. Once you see how the parts are moving, this is where you ask 3 questions to solve the puzzle. And the 3 questions are, when you make an attempt, you ask, how well did that work? It's not just a binary question of did you or didn't you hit the target. I'm inviting the good and the bad. How well did that work? Second question is, what have we learned? This is where I say to teams, yes, the metrics and the measurement is important, but don't just tell me the metrics. Tell me the story, the narrative. This is what triggers the right brain focus as well and the creative problem solving. You're not just looking at the left brain numbers and spitting out numbers, but you're telling me the narrative. And then lastly, the third question, which is based on how well it worked and what you've learned. If I gave you a magic wand, what will you ask for? And this also triggers this creative problem solving. So now you're using your whole brain. You're not just analyzing numbers and looking at how well it worked. You're telling me the story and you're thinking about the adaptation. All of this is using a whole brain. So I'll pause there. It's a lot I covered. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No, that's amazing. I was just taking all of that in, and I think it's such a lovely way of revisiting the assumptions, I guess, that people probably have made along the way and just rechecking back in, like what are we overlooking in here? And I like your question actually about how well did this work? So it's not just what went well and what didn't go well. It's just how well did this work? Scale, everything. And it really kind of yeah, like you said, opens up rather than just thinking it the great and the terrible. It's the whole spectrum of what we were thinking about. And then what did we learn from this? I love that so much. Um, I can imagine there might be people listening to this nodding along, going, yeah, that sounds really great. That's amazing. What is it that's going to spark in them kind of this desire to do that? Because I'm imagining they're also kind of thinking like, I think I probably know the answers to all of that already. They've got the same they'll have the same ideas bubbling up that they've probably always had bubbling up, and they're just going to think those are the answers to the questions rather than taking a minute, maybe even pressing pause to sit down and do the exercise. So what would be kind of your challenge for people that who already think they might know the answers to those questions?
Yeah. So it is fascinating, right? Because if you are, let's say, playing Wordle, it's instinctive that you think in this way. If you'll make an attempt and you're instinctively looking at that attempt and saying, okay, how well did that work? Okay, I got this letter in this, the rest all was not right. Okay, so then what have I learned from this? And therefore, what will I try next? You're instinctively thinking this way. And so, the more you are already in this mindset of puzzle solving, right? The more you might find that, I think like this. But here's the thing, in teams, we rarely ever talk about this explicitly. And this is a way of creating scaffolding for your team so that not only are you thinking in this way, but you're doing two things. One, you're giving your team the scaffolding so that they can puzzle solve with you and communicate with you exactly where they're at. And two, it gives you a sense of exactly how much skills, knowledge, and experience one has as they're in this puzzle solving. So that as a leader, it helps you know how much can I delegate to this person versus how much handholding do they need. And so making this very explicit is helpful from that angle. If you're a leader, you could use this with someone in your one-on-one meetings. They might be working on a problem, and instead of this message that society has communicated, which is don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions, which makes someone hold back and telling you what's really going on, they can come to you with their attempt of, well, so here's the puzzle I'm working on, and here's my first attempt. How will it work? What have I learned? What will I do next? They might not have all the answers in terms of the problem, and they might not have the solutions, but this is where I am in my thinking, and you're able to course correct as a leader. And unlike OKRs, right, it's not like a view in the rear view mirror that you either hit the target or you didn't. You know exactly where someone is. And a leader I worked with, he described it as having ears on the track so that I can anticipate what's coming and I can make changes.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I That's it's such a good reframing, actually, that kind of, rather than just thinking about what has happened, but it is also then casting that forward to go, okay, so what's the impact of this? How do we predict that this might help or not help us? And how do we evaluate that hypothesis, I suppose, around what will we do, what will we expect to happen, and when it doesn't happen, oh, that's curious, that's interesting, what did we miss, how do we go back through this process again? That's cool. I also like that it opens up that, if I kind of expand it even further to kind of, when we think about our interactions around creating inclusive spaces as well, even from that perspective, I feel like this is relevant because it's, if you have tried to engage in a topic you're not familiar with, right? This feels like it's applicable. You may have done your best. There may still be a lot of learning for you to do, and you may have got something wrong. And it can feel like all you want to do is retreat. I don't want to engage with this. That, if we were going to take the OKR approach, we would have missed our target. And that would probably mean that, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm clearly bad at that. Maybe that's not for me. Whereas this approach is really, okay, if I go back to the three O's, I can think about, well, what was the problem? How can I set that out for myself? Where was it that maybe I missed the mark, and what observations have I got? And then taking it forward to, okay, well, then the puzzle solving sets me up for what will I do next time. And I really like that approach to keeping people curious, keeping people open to experimentation without it feeling necessarily like such a personal failure. It's more of a I'm learning, and here's how I'm learning, and this is what I'm trying.
Oh, so much to unpack in what you said, and I love it. You know, in the corporate world, there is so much of this refrain and the mantra, we have to embrace failure if we want to innovate, fail fast, learn fast. It's all of this artificial and contrived stuff about embracing failure.
It's just
And I find
words, right?
it's funny, right? Because when I think about our natural instincts, when we're working on a puzzle, if you're working on a Rubik's Cube or when you're working on Wordle, you don't go through this artificial thinking like, oh, I made a mistake there. I have to embrace failure. You just sort of instinctively go like, oh yeah, that didn't work and here's why and here's what I'm going to do next, right? And you're
Yeah.
sort of so curious and enthusiastic about figuring out that puzzle. And that's what I find fascinating, that in the corporate world, somehow we've managed to suck this creative instinct that people have. We've managed to suck it out of them so that we then artificially have to contrive these phrases that we have to embrace failure. And
Mm,
so the big question for me was, how do we just get back to those natural instincts that we've had all along?
mm,
And everything that you were saying about curiosity, the excitement of the puzzle, I find it fascinating that, I have done this exercise live with podcast hosts, with workshops, attendees, with audiences in my talks. And I tell them, just tell me how you feel when I ask you each of these two questions. Just think about how it feels and what feelings it triggers in you, right? So the first question is, what goals do you want to achieve in your company? What goals? And the second question is, what puzzles do you want to solve for your company this year?
mm.
Did you feel the difference?
Definitely. Yep. Yep.
Do you want to share?
100%. Yeah. So interesting. When we think, or when I thought then around goals, it was immediately they were kind of like singular block items of things. It's like it's going to be a revenue goal, it's going to be a this target. Like it felt very, yeah, outcome focused and quite soulless. And when you said puzzles, my brain was like, ooh, immediately thinking, what are the puzzles that I want to solve? Like it became this whole invitation to explore my business in a different way. And my brain loved that way more.
Exactly. And this is what I find fascinating, that, goals and targets instantly create the sense of anxiety. Like when I do this in conferences, right? A lot of people will share instantly that I feel the sense of heaviness and burden, the sense of, oh, I'm going to be evaluated. What's the right goal? What is the right number? Will I hit it or not? Right. And that's the sense of anxiety. And you don't necessarily do your best performance under that sort of anxiety. The world creates enough anxiety for people right now. If we want to improve people's performance, adding to that anxiety by setting goals and targets isn't the way. And so instead, creating puzzles for them where we're keeping people aligned in terms of what we want to solve together and keeping that alignment in terms of how things are going, what we're going to try next, why we're trying that next, right? All of that drives both this excitement, but keeping that shared alignment so that you can achieve better business results. And that's the key that I've found, that taking this puzzle-based approach in my consulting work has helped me drive better business results. There's a company I've been working with for the last 3 years, and when I joined and started consulting for them, sales had stalled in 2023. And since then, we doubled sales in 2024, and we doubled sales again in 2025 by completely changing this mindset to a puzzle setting and solving mindset. And not to mention just what it's done for the team dynamic and the sense of togetherness. It has been a complete shift that I can't tell you how rewarding it feels.
I mean, that makes such sense, doesn't it? Because I can imagine if you bring a group of people to say and like Your target is to make 30 million widgets. Cool. Your target is to solve this dilemma that we've got about our turnover and our client connection. And like, it opens up the whole world of everything being able to coming back to the vision piece. Oh, I don't have the same skills as everybody else, but in my skills, I can apply it in this way. And here's the thing, here's the part of the puzzle that I solve. And everybody gets to show up. I really love that.
Yeah, one of the hardest things I find though is how do you convince leadership to do this? Because let's approach this from an angle of empathy, right? Because and I'll share what did not work well in terms of approaching leadership with this puzzle mindset. My first attempt at this that did not work well was talking to CEOs to say, here's why goals and targets don't work well. Let's not set targets for the team, or let's not set OKRs. And that did not work well for two reasons. One, because as a leader, this is what you've learned all your life, that goals and targets are how you motivate teams, how you drive progress, right? And the second thing is there's this worry that you're talking about this puzzle setting and puzzle solving. How do I know that my team is going to be able to do this well? So it's the devil I know, goal setting. And maybe it's not perfect, but it's the devil I know versus you're suggesting something, and I have no idea whether my team is going to be capable of doing that. So that I see is the biggest challenge of shifting this mindset to puzzle setting and puzzle solving, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to that, what I've found to work well is not telling leaders, hey, don't do goal setting. The way I approach it now is I say to leaders, here's the downside of goals and targets, but I'm not asking you to change anything. Just know that this is the downside. And what you want is a culture where people are having these really insightful conversations where they're presenting to you how well are things actually going? What have they learned? And what are they going to do next? You want the truth from the trenches in terms of how things are going. And then the second piece of this is I work bottom up, where I work directly with teams and say, okay, so far we've gotten so used to working with goals and targets that we have ourselves sort of stripped away our instincts of setting up and solving puzzles. So now let's get back to those instincts. And I've had to sort of go back to working with teams and saying, let's try this out, try it with me. Look at a feature that you released last month or a couple of months ago and tell me, how well did that work? What have you learned? What will you try next, right? And there's sometimes this muscle that I realize has atrophied. And so it's about building that muscle back up in teams. And just in a couple of sessions, I start to see that people get so enthusiastic about this. It changes the whole dynamic in terms of how we talk about what has worked or not. And so then, as we build some practice, then I'm able to bring the top down and bottom up approach together and have different conversations.
Brilliant. What a masterful way of using your own model to then really evaluate the work that you're doing. And it's almost like the ever evolving loop, isn't it? Where you're like, well, it works for me. I'm going to keep doing it in practice. And then it helps me evolve how I'm going to work with my clients to help them keep doing it. So it's a beautiful spiral. I wonder like that. And I liked as well that you called out from a leadership perspective and from a human perspective, right? We like certainty, don't we? We're kind of pre-programmed for like, we like it when we can be certain of an outcome. And
Mm.
sometimes more kind of conceptual ideas or as yet untested thinking can be a challenge for us to step out of our comfort zones and take a chance on, well, let's try that, let's try something. Let's try something different. Because we also want to know, have the certainty of, well, we want to get a good result out of this. Can you guarantee that? Well, maybe not. It depends. Although I would imagine uh, your data of your clients would dictate that I'm fairly certain we could guarantee a good outcome for you, providing you would put the work in.
Oh, yeah. Again, so many interesting things in what you just mentioned here, right? When what you said this desire for certainty that we have. One thing I've realized is our very desire to set goals and targets, it's because we love this idea of certainty. And numbers give us this illusion of certainty. When I set a goal and a target that this is what marks uh, what marks success, how we evaluate success, I've created certainty on so many fronts. First, that if we do this, then I know that is the right solution. And two, that this is the right degree of what we need to achieve so that we're on the right track. All of this is on the assumption of this being the right solution, and this is the level of impact that we want. Like, if we're doing all of this, this is the right thing, right? And the reality is, I've actually found, and I'm sure our listeners have experienced this, how often does it happen that there's a goal that was set, and halfway through the year, you realize that is the wrong thing to be pursuing altogether. And yet it sort of feels like, yeah, but we set that. Now I can either do the hard thing of saying, well, that wasn't the right thing to follow. But, it's awkward to have to go back and do that, right? And then what do? Do you also renegotiate goals that you have sort of set across the whole organization? There's so much in terms of just mental load, right? But okay, first of all, there's that certainty that we crave. The second kind of certainty is also in terms of this whole puzzle setting. Puzzles feel uncertain because it feels like, when you ask these open questions and you're saying, this is the observation, and here's the set of open questions, you're saying, wait, I don't know the answers to these questions. And that's a really uncomfortable spot to be in. So there's a leader at Adidas that I know, and she shared with me that she had used this puzzle setting and puzzle solving with her team. And in the puzzle setting part, when she shared the observation and here the open questions, her team actually verbalized this. They said to her, but shouldn't we already know the answers to this? And I've faced the same pushback that when I asked open questions, the salesperson said, oh, you're asking very basic questions of our customers, like you're wasting their time. And in reality, we needed to ask those questions so that we could figure out their mental models and how do they think? Why isn't our product working for these people? If we don't understand their mental models, we cannot uncover why something we did isn't working. We'll focus on maybe features, but not uncover sort of the underlying problem. And so this is why, like, as a leader, we have to get comfortable with uncertainty. What is good about a puzzle mindset is a puzzle inherently means you don't know the answers. Like, if you knew all the answers, it wouldn't be a puzzle in the first place.
Yeah. Quite 100%. If we were getting it right and we were nailing it, then it's not a problem, is it? Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing those examples as well, and for kind of bringing that all together, because I think that's really helpful in illustrating. And I like the phrase you use there, the illusion of certainty, as well, because just, as you so beautifully said there, just because we say, well, these are our numbers, these are our targets, and we feel like there's a certainty, it's just an illusion. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with my neighbor just yesterday, where he was kind of I was going to go with grumbling because nobody knows who my neighbor is, about his business, and that he had to go into a meeting where he was going to, that he knew that he was going to be £2 million down on his budget, and he's going to be asked to, like, how are we going to hit target? And he's like, well, it's not going to happen, is it? And it's exactly that, isn't it? It's like, well, just because they've set a number, they know that their business landscape has changed, yet the expectation is, but that's your target, how are you going to hit it? Rather than, okay, why has the business landscape changed? What's going, like, asking different questions to arrive at a place where they could maybe have a different outcome, rather than just turning to one person and say, well, what are you going to do about that?
Oh, I love it. Exactly. As a leadership team, you might need to look at those open questions and say, okay, sales are stalling. So what is going on? Here are some open questions. Is it that maybe AI is shifting our market in ways we did not anticipate? Is it that maybe our messaging is no longer resonating? Maybe it's our product that's no longer meeting the needs. Like there might be a bunch of open questions we genuinely don't know answers to. And then different parts of the organization might have to take away pieces of this puzzle and translate it into what does it mean for my function?
Absolutely. And I wonder as well if I may draw kind of another parallel here actually, because something that you said earlier is still sitting me with me when you talked about ethical heroes in waiting. And I'm actually thinking as well, there's a puzzle setting process in here as well, isn't there? Because like you say, we all like to think when faced with, whatever the situation is, we would all be that person that would step in, that would speak up, that would do the quote unquote right thing. We all like to believe that we're that person, but actually, when it comes to the crunch, a lot of the times we're not, because uncertainty and certainty are these things that play on our minds. And if we don't know how something's going to go down or what the outcome of us stepping up or speaking out is going to be, that actually we choose to stay silent. And I wonder if we can use that same then puzzle setting thought process around, okay, what what did I observe in myself when I did or did not choose to act? Was that in alignment with how I thought I would act? And why do I think that maybe I chose to speak up in that time when I didn't choose to speak up previously, or didn't speak up this time, even though inside I was desperate to? What was it that prevented me? And come up with our own problem summary to then, like you said, then to play back the puzzle solving around, okay, so well, which parts of that worked well? Because even if we choose not to step up or speak up, it works well because it protects our own safety. So we can, okay, that worked well for me. Did it work well for the situation? And we can still apply that logic. I think. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, I love how you bring it back to the personal side too, and using these frameworks on a personal side. What you said resonates so much. What you're really talking about is reflection, right? And using these same questions for reflection to ask, how well did it work? What have I learned? What would I try next? And there's this beautiful quote I came across last year. It went, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience,
Ooh.
right? Um, and I've been thinking a lot about that. And by now, you see that I think in frameworks. Like one thing that I have been thinking a lot about is a framework for growth. Because a big theme for me in 2025, and I know it will continue to be so in 2026, the theme has been personal growth. Um, a lot of this growth for me has been unpacking, my upbringing, living in South Africa right after apartheid laws ended. Like there's a lot in there that I've been thinking about, right? And there's three stages of growth that I've realized. And that's sort of this framework I think about. The first stage of growth is when we experience discomfort by doing something that feels really hard, when we struggle through something hard. And my dad always, he would say to me when I was a little girl, um, all of these struggles, they're like the butterfly struggling through the cocoon, that it's that struggle that makes you beautiful at the end. Keep going through it, right? But here's the thing. I've realized that that first stage, it's only instinctual growth. You sort of struggle through it, and that struggle shapes you in good ways and bad. And therein lies the second stage of growth, that we reflect. And this is what you were talking about, where, we reflect on how well did that work? What have I learned? What would I do next? For the butterfly, the cocoon shaped it in certain ways, and there's only one season in its life, right? Whereas we need to keep adapting and growing and learning and changing. And for that, we have to be able to look back on how the struggles shaped us and what parts of that shape do we want to keep or do we want to prune? And reflection in what you just described is so crucial for that. And then there comes the third stage of growth, which is the communication part. And this is the third thing I've been reflecting on, that, relationships, whether personal relationship or your relationship with your company, a relationship is always a metastable state, that it either is one where you're growing together or you're growing apart. And so if you don't communicate your growth and stay aligned, right, you're most likely drifting apart. And on a personal note, right, I just started reading this book by Joan Didion. It's called The White Album. Or no, sorry, there's a second book by her. It's called The Notes to John. And Notes to John is a book about her notes written for her husband when she was going through therapy, because she wanted to share with him her growth. She didn't want them to drift apart. But my point is, even in the corporate world, you might want to bring your whole team with you on this journey, because as you're learning, you want to get people with you, right? And not waste all of those learnings, but also not drift apart. So my point is, everything that you said, this puzzle setting and puzzle solving, it's very aligned with this way of growing, that you struggle through discomfort and then you reflect and then you communicate.
My goodness, that was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, gosh, what a leap into how we reflect and how we view personal growth. That is incredible. And I love really how you wrap that all up there. And was it metastable was the
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
That's
I
again my
hadn't,
engineering speak,
yeah,
right?
I hadn't heard of that as a concept before, but it makes complete sense. And actually, you're right. We have to consciously apply effort to keep our relationships going, because we aren't, nothing's a given. And I love, 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 love. I'm also going to check out, was that Joan Didion that you said, Notes to John?
Mm.
Okay, we're going to make sure that's in the show notes too, for anyone that wants to go and find that. So I'm thinking we've covered so much in this episode. There has been so many amazing things that you've shared. So I have a real feeling that people are going to be thinking, okay, I need to know, how do we get more of Radhika? Because like, you are a phenomenal person with so many incredible ideas and ways to help people. So how can people get in touch with you and contact you and find out more about you if they're interested?
So there's the Radical Product Thinking book. It's wherever books are sold. It's on Amazon too. So that's Radical Product Thinking. You can also download the toolkit for puzzle setting and puzzle solving, and it's a free download. You can go to radicalproduct.com, and I'll share the link for show notes. I call it the OLA toolkit, which stands for Observe, Hypothesize, Learn, Adapt. OLA. Just sort of rolls off the tongue. And then lastly, you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I always love to hear from people and how they're creating change, how you're setting and solving puzzles. So as you use this framework, please also share your experiences, because I'm working on this second book, and you might share your experiences, and it might just make it into the book as a case study if you would like, of course. So please feel free to reach out.
Wow, what an invitation, people. I feel like immediately download the framework and immediately start thinking about that. And also I can imagine, from even just in this conversation with you, there will be things that people will share that I'm sure will inspire your grey matter, in all of the connections that you make and how you replay that. So I think fantastic for people to get in touch with you and tell you what they're thinking as a result of hearing this. That will be amazing. Radhika Dutt, is there anything else that you came to say that you have not had an opportunity to say?
Um, no, I think we've covered so much. I will say that I loved this conversation. You're such an amazing listener. Like, the things that you pick up and bring back and tie together, and then words that you remember all the way from the beginning of the conversation. I love it. I've loved this really insightful, like, back and forth that we've had. You've added so much to my thinking. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That is just gorgeous of you to say. I really appreciate that. And also, I have to say, it's called a pencil. You say the words, and I think that's genius, and I write them down. So my menopausal brain doesn't hold on to things, I have to be honest. But thank you for bringing all of your insight and your wisdom and your years of learning and observations and assimilating it so well into examples and frameworks and contexts that make sense very quickly. So thank you for bringing what you bring to the world.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having
Radhika
me.
Dutt, thank you so much for joining me on the Speaking of Inclusion podcast.